Hi, everyone. Well, today I have the pleasure of talking to Sara Zeff Geber, PhD, who is the nation's foremost expert on solo aging. I love that term. She is an author, professional speaker, and certified retirement coach. She was named an influencer in aging by PBS Next Avenue and is a regular contributor to Forbes.com in the areas of both aging and retirement. Sara's book, Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers, was published in 2018, and you have a couple of other books that look very interesting too. I loved this one, something about not being your mother.
Not your mother's retirement.
Yes, not your mother's retirement. Well, I think the most recent book, or maybe it wasn't the most recent book, but the Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers was just an excellent book, and it was in fact selected as the best book on aging well by the Wall Street Journal. So Sara is a fellow with Nexus Insights, which is a think tank advancing the well-being of older adults through innovative housing and healthcare ideas. So welcome, Sara.
Thank you, Sharri.
Oh, it's just a pleasure to have you here because I think this topic of solo aging is just even more relevant today, whether we have children or don't, because we often don't live where our children live.
Right.
Is that true? Do you think that's...
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I first conceived of the idea of solo aging, it was in response to a discussion I was having with a very good friend of mine who was recounting all the times she had spent flying back and forth from the West Coast to the East Coast, trying to take care of her aging mother, and ultimately getting her moved and selling her house and the whole thing. And thankfully, she had a brother that lived back there that could help. But she literally spent the better part of a year and a half on an airplane going back and forth. And I looked at her when we met and I said, Sandy, you and I don't have children. Who's going to do that for us?
Yeah.
And of course, there were no answers to that. And that's when I started really seriously looking at what were the possibilities for people that didn't have children and who needed to provide for themselves later in life, because we're all going to get older. At least that's the better option.
Right.
Well, we need to plan for some of these things that typically adult children do for their aging parents.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that by the time I had done the research and done several articles and a bunch of talks on this subject, I got so much pushback from people that said, wait a minute, people that don't have children are not the only solo agers. No, I have one child, but he or she lives half a continent away, or any number of situations.
Right.
I'm divorced, or I've never married, or whatever it is. So I ultimately came up with quite a number of scenarios under which one might consider oneself a solo ager. So it's quite a prevalent phenomenon, even with just people who don't have children. It's almost 20% of baby boomer women. And then when you add into that the people who consider themselves solo agers for other reasons, we're talking of about well north of 30% of the boomer population.
Yeah. And I would imagine it's more often even women, because women tend to live longer, and therefore the population of solo agers to some extent is a significant proportion of women. It's interesting.
It is.
Yeah. So talk about, though, what's different, not only, because you need to have a child an adult child, obviously, that, is competent in some of the areas. And I think it's much more complex than it was a decade ago or a generation ago, certainly. And not all kids have the time, space, or capacity to manage it. Yeah.
That's right. And that's why there are so many people who may have children, but they still consider themselves solo agers because the kids either live too far away,
Yeah.
or they may be estranged, or they're not completely functional for one reason or another. There's all kinds of scenarios these days.
Sure.
And of course, then there's the rest of the population, many of whom just say, well, I may not be a solo ager technically, but I'm going to plan as though I was one because I don't want to count on my kids and I don't want to burden my kids.
Yeah.
So there's all of those scenarios.
So
And by the way, there are plenty of men who are solo agers. They're not quite as vocal about it.
Interesting.
Yeah. In fact, there's one man that I was on a panel with just a couple of weeks ago at the American Society on Aging conference, he's a psychologist, and he's written not extensively, but he's really looked into the whole issue of male solo aging. And I'm so sorry, I can't come up with his name right now.
How interesting.
But he has written for Next Avenue. So you can look up, if you're really curious about that, anyone can look up men and solo aging on Next Avenue.
Sure.
So yeah, but there are certainly men out there that are kind of less vocal about it. They're less of an activist about it.
So talk about the process. So pretend we've got the high level workshop, so to speak, that you're giving. Share with our listeners what are the ingredients of successful solo aging and what we should all be thinking about. Yeah.
Sure. I like to look at it somewhat like a three-legged stool, as the metaphor used for so many things. But in this case, I look at it as one leg being financial, one leg being legal, and the third being social. So it's fairly cut and dried with the legal and the financial law. The legal, obviously, you want to have a good estate plan, at least a will and an advance directive for health care, assign a power of attorney to someone who can make decisions for you if and when you cannot, either on a permanent basis or temporary basis.
Okay.
We should all have that in place by the time we're in our 50s.
Yeah.
And then there's the financial, and that generally, all I usually say about that, because I am in no way a financial advisor, but I think that using financial advisors is very important, especially for solo agers. So finding out from a financial advisor who can take a look at your financial situation, your income, your outflow, what you already are making in retirement or will make in retirement, put together with Social Security. They can run that through some very fancy algorithms and tell you whether what you're doing is sustainable for the rest of your life. And they usually assume that we're going to live into our mid-90s now. I know a couple of them that extended out to 103, but
oh goodness,
yeah, that's sort of daunting.
It is. No, I may not say that when I'm 100, but right now,
yeah,
it's very daunting.
Well, so know what your financial situation is, I guess is what I'm saying, and usually that it takes an expert to help with that. And then the social, which I actually consider of the three, in many respects, the most important, usually involves the question of where you're going to live.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most important things for solo agers, and especially those who do not have children or don't live anywhere near their children, to have a community. And that could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, talk about that, because I think of a book club is entirely different than who is going to pick me up, after I've had that procedure at the hospital that they will not even allow me to go home in an Uber,
Right.
Those are different people.
They may or may not be. I love to use book clubs as an example because my husband and I moved to a town in California that was a little less frenetic than Silicon Valley, where we had been living. We made that move about 8 years ago. And one of the first things I did was join a book club, because I love being in book clubs. And I didn't immediately form hard and fast friendships, but this book club's been going for 7+ years now. And because it was brand new when I joined, it was just forming. It sort of happened through nextdoor.com.
Sure.
And so everybody came in at the same time. And over the years, I have formed some very close friendships with several of the women in the club. One I walk with on almost a daily basis. Ideally, communities that we're a part of have a variety of ages. And I was very lucky with this book club. We have women in their late 40s all the way up to one that's just about 80. So I have formed a friendship with a couple of the younger women. And almost any of them in the book club that live near me, and most do, I would feel okay about saying, can you pick me up after a procedure? Absolutely. But that wouldn't have been the case 6 years ago. I had to, and it's what a lot of people think about forming new friendships is they're going to know immediately whether they want to be friends with someone. No, I don't think you will. I think you need to have some exposure to people before you really know whether that person is going to become a friend. And I mean exposure over several years. Back to the whole social and it being so tied to where you live, I think that in many respects, aging in place that AARP is pushing so hard and trying to get everybody ready for, they make it all about what your house looks like and how it's equipped. And I honestly think that for solo agers, aging in place can be a really lousy idea. No matter how well, no matter whether you have a walk-in tub and ramp to get you outside. It's about the community. That's much more important than the facility. So I encourage solo agers to consider, if they live in a suburban home somewhere where they're dependent on driving a car or having someone else drive them, even if it's Uber, to consider moving to somewhere more manageable, moving to somewhere where you're much closer to people. That may mean an apartment. It may mean a condominium, the right apartment or condominium. It might be a 55+ community. It may be a life plan community, the expensive ones. That you have to buy into and then you pay monthly fees, or an active adult community, which used to be known as a 55+ community. Those can be wonderful places to meet people because the homes are usually close together and they're small and they're manageable and they have activities. But it might also mean joining a co-housing community or moving into a mobile home park. There are so many ways to be closer and more in community with people than living in a suburban house.
So proximity, I'm hearing that proximity to people is super important, regardless of what you choose of those different varieties. You walk out your door and there's someone there, or there's someone upstairs or someone downstairs or whatever.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
What happens to us though that we need that? Why do humans need that?
Well, if you ask any person in their 80s or 90s whether their world has shrunk as they've gotten into those final decades, they will tell you, yes, it has. Our world shrinks in a lot of ways. Our focus shifts. I'm in my 70s, my early 70s, and I think for the last 10 years, my friends and I have been joking about the organ recital. What we mean by that is
what does that mean?
When we get together, so one of the first things we talk about is whatever ailments we're dealing with.
gosh.
Somebody had a fall or somebody had to have some surgery. And so we call it the organ recycle.
Oh, that's funny. So I'm thinking you like the organ in
No, no,
no.
no.
Okay.
So, it's one of those natural things. I don't know
Mhm.
anyone my age or even in their 60s and up who won't relate to that.
Yeah.
It's just something we do.
Right.
And I know a lot of people who have stopped driving at night.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people who've stopped driving altogether.
Mm-hmm.
That really makes your world shrink.
Yes.
But what's immediately around us becomes much more important. We kind of end up spending less time doing things like planning the next European vacation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a number of things that just coalesce to make our world a little smaller. It doesn't have to be worse. It can be small and good.
Yeah.
But that is what happens.
Sure. It's very interesting, though, that you bring up the proximity to people, because for a short period of time, right during COVID, actually, I moved back to Minneapolis, where my children are, bought a home, renovated the home, and it was a suburb that was just outside the city of Minneapolis. We're talking blocks. The difference in how I felt in terms of being a part of a community compared to where I live, which is Boston, and I always have lived in condos, large buildings and small buildings, but always condos, is so incredibly different. The isolation, even when you can see the house next door, but if it's different. You're in that house all by yourself. Yeah,
and usually you drive into your garage.
Exactly.
But you don't see another person. They drive into their garages, and it's just a very different world.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, talk a little bit, if you can, about, let's say you do move, you leave the suburban home, you have to you're going to downsize, because as soon as you go where there's lots of people, you're typically in a smaller space. And that's actually preferable, because then somebody's closer to you. If you don't have 3,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet, someone is closer to you. But talk about, so if you move, building community, because it's not easy. It's like you almost, I say this to myself now, I'm an introvert, but I have to really force myself when I move to a new place to go out and do things. I don't know.
Yes. And I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, either when I'm making a presentation and they'll raise their hand and ask, or come up to me later and say, I don't know how to make friends at this stage of my life. How do I make friends? That just came naturally when I was younger. Yes, it came naturally when you were younger, because first you were in school and that set up a community for you. And then you were at work and that set up a community for you of some sort. Even if you didn't punch a time clock, you still had colleagues, you had people that you worked with, or had professional association. And then once you leave that workplace and go on to something else, you may not set up another community for yourself unless you do it deliberately. So things like book clubs and other sorts of more institutionalized activities can go a long way. Yeah. That means you have to be a bit of a joiner. And people just recoil when I say be a joiner. But you have to join something. So whether it's finding other people with your common interests, that have a common interest with you through websites like meetup.com. Great. Where you find people in your actual zip code or nearby to go do something with, play tennis, take a hike, have a game of Scrabble.
Right.
Almost anything you can find on meetup.com. For other people, it might look like rejoining or getting more active in whatever church or synagogue or place of worship you relate to. And for a lot of people, it's the first time they've ever joined any sort of organization that had a religious leaning to it. One thing I've discovered is that most places of worship, unless they're quite orthodox, have discovered pretty easily that their older members are there not for religious teaching. They're not there to renew their allegiance to a religion. They're there for social reasons.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's what you'll find. I know many of the churches and synagogues around my area have older adult groups, and they do things together. So that's certainly another way. But joining almost anything that'll get you in front of people, whether it's becoming a master gardener or helping out at your local animal shelter, you'll be involved with other people.
Yeah, yeah. And doing what you love. That's an interesting conversation because I feel like we also have to continue to do things that we learn something new.
Yes.
Would you agree?
I would definitely agree, mostly from the standpoint of all the brain research that's coming out these days, that we need to keep renewing those brain cells and keep giving them new things to recharge with and to reactivate. So it goes beyond crossword puzzles and Sudoku these days.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's taking the technology course at a community, education program or whatever, because you meet people when you go out and take courses and have conversations about whatever it is that might be interesting to you. But when you talked about the three legs of the stool, are those the key ingredients to happiness for solo agers, or what else is out there? Because those sound very prescriptive.
Yes, they are prescriptive, and I see that as the pathway.
Okay.
Financial, legal, and social.
Yeah.
That's pretty much encompasses the world.
It does. It's truly our lives in so many ways, but like a stool, like an old stool, sometimes we get off base because we know we should take care of the financial piece. We know we should take care of the legal piece. The social piece is much more ambiguous and personal, although the others are too, I guess. But truly based on what it is that you like to do, what your mobility is, if you're comfortable taking classes at night or getting together with people at night versus the day. Like I find my book clubs that get together during the day are an entirely different composition of women. And in my case, they were mostly women than the evening groups. Yeah. So it's really, I think it's interesting that it's difficult for us to navigate that leg of the stool. It's not as clear. It's not as obvious. Do you ever get into, and maybe this impacts social also, is ways or talk about ways to stay connected with children, to stay connected with grandchildren? I know you refer to, primarily solo agers, but it might even be friends that you no longer live close to. How important is all of that? And what happens with that? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the key is staying close to people, and it'll be different people depending on where you are in life, what resources you have. I like to, when I'm giving a talk, I show a slide that has the social network of a solo ager versus the social network of a parent. And the social network of a parent is much more intricate. And through those children and grandchildren, you have in-laws and friends and a whole huge mix of people. And the people that I know that are parents have a very different social network, especially those that have kids that live nearby, and they see them all the time, and they maybe do some babysitting. They travel with them. That's their whole social network in some cases.
Yeah.
Where for someone that doesn't have kids or whose kids live far away, their social network is more closely tied to their friends, their community, whatever community they belong to.
Certainly.
And that's where they get their reinforcement. That's where the strong lines are drawn. Maybe to siblings. Some people are very fortunate in that they have siblings and nieces and nephews that they live close to and that they can stay close to throughout their lives. And that becomes a big part of their social network.
Yeah, yeah.
So it really depends on the person and what resources they have.
Yeah. Well, and also I'll push back a little bit on the if you have children and then all of the automatic connections, because the one thing that I learned when I did spend that 3 years in Minneapolis is that I could not depend on my children to be my social system, so to speak, in entirety, and be my entertainment, so to speak. I had to, because there are different relationships. I do have adult children and I have lots of grandchildren, and they're different relationships, even as adults with your children, than you have with a good friend. Very different. You have some different conversations. I have found with my adult children, I have to listen. So I listen probably 85% of the time, and 15% of the time, someone might say, well, what about you? We're friends. We don't, at this age, I don't have friends like that. So consequently, they're much more relationships of equality.
Yes, more even.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you need all kinds, because part of it, is that even when we were, those of us that have children, then when we were younger, we couldn't make the parents of the children our children hung around with or played sports with or whatever, our total existence. We had to have multiple people, or the work people. I mean, how many, if often I have found that women that do not have children, their work life, is a really important part, and that may be why they didn't have children. They had very, very high-powered careers. And what shifts in that, Sara, as I'm sure there's some women who are listening to this that are, 50 and thinking, oh gosh, these colleagues are going to be friends of mine long after I leave the office, so to speak. And shaking your head.
No, in most cases, that doesn't happen. You think it's going to happen, you plan for it to happen, and it just doesn't.
Yeah.
So you may be the exception that proves the rule, but what I generally encourage people to do is to start to refine their social network before they leave work.
Okay.
So that they're starting to re-energize those relationships they have with neighbors or people from their church or synagogue, or join that book club.
Right.
Often really high-powered jobs, executive jobs that women hold are just all-encompassing.
Right.
It would be laughable to suggest to them that they join a book club.
Certainly.
So, but if you can manage a kind of a ramp down, or what's known more professionally as a phased retirement, you might buy yourself the opportunity to bridge that gap between work life and post-work life. A lot of people do that with volunteering. I have a cousin who's in her mid-50s, and she has a pretty involved career. But in the last couple of years, she's been volunteering every Sunday at a dog rescue that's not far from where she lives. And she knows that when she eventually leaves work, that she'll get even more involved. But she already knows the woman who owns the rescue. That person knows and trusts my cousin Sharon, and so she's beginning to build that, even as she still is working. So those things make us healthier, better balanced people as well.
Yeah, more well-rounded. But it's true, though, that as you said, if you had the high-powered, very intense corporate job, there wasn't enough space in your life. There wasn't enough energy left in you to think about, oh gosh, I need to join a book club or volunteer anywhere. But I love how you use that word, kind of phased in retirement, so to speak. Do you also, have you found that like there are differences that in the 50s women, 60s women, and then do they start to, do you recommend that people start to project, if I'm in my 70s, what 80s are going to look like? What am I going to do at that point? Is kind of like, sounds really awful. I always say we're all in this line. And we just don't know when we're going to be at the front of the line or a little further back. But we're really, in some ways, it becomes a different question when you're closer to the end of the line, so to speak, or the front of the line. That. Yeah. Do you see that also? Yeah,
I think to the extent possible. I mean, we just don't know. None of us have a crystal ball.
No.
We don't know whether they're, I'll use myself. I can think about what things will be like in my 80s, but very honestly, there's no guarantee I'll get there.
Right.
So, but I'm a planner. That's probably why I'm in this work, because I do like to plan. I believe that people should do as much planning as they're capable of. And I am married, so my husband and I are married solo agers. But I encourage people who don't have, especially that don't have children or children who live far away, to consider themselves solo agers, even if they're married, because eventually one of us will be the first to die. And then the person who remains will be a true solo ager. And the better you've planned for that, the more you'll be able to ease into that status.
Makes sense. Total sense. So why, you mentioned that the AARP, which I believe it or not, I still throw away those ads that come in the mail for the AARP. But you mentioned that they really talk and tout aging in place. Why is that like something that I always think there's a conspiracy of some kind, like they all want age in place? It's like, okay, so why do you want that? Tell me a bit about that, because in the same context, living with people that are all in the same age group, sort of, doesn't feel great to me, honestly. If I'm perfect, I like to have a broad cross-section of people in my life. I like to see little kids in strollers. I like to see, meltdowns on the street with a 2-year-old. And I enjoy being around people my age and people much older than me. So talk about that aging in place. Why is that different? How is that different from say, an active adult community?
Well, I think that you really spelled it out. If you're going to age in place, usually that people hear that and they think, I'm going to age in this home that I'm in right now, whether it's in the city or the suburbs or whatever. And then what AARP wants you to do is say, okay, I'm going to do that. Now, what do I need to do to this home to make it more livable?
Okay.
And I say to that, how are you going to manage in that home when you cannot do the things that you are doing today, and you don't have the people around you that you have today, or the people that live around you are, it's several several dozen yards away in another single family home.
Mhm.
Not everybody lives in a totally unsuitable place for aging in place for a solo ager. I mean, some people already live in condominiums where they know their neighbors, or they live we have here in California, we have lovely mobile home parks just all over the place, that are set up for community. They have community centers with pools and community gathering rooms, and they have activities. The residents organize the activities themselves because they want to be a community. So I've become a big fan of the idea of aging in a mobile home park. And of course, it all depends on what you can afford,
Right.
as well as what your preferences are.
Sure.
The fancier retirement communities take some wealth to move in, to qualify. Only about, I don't know, something like 12% of the population can even afford to move into one of those. So most people have to look beyond that to where could they age that would have the social component that they're going to need, as well as the physical component.
So I couldn't agree with you more. That there's something for everyone. You have to figure out what's right for you, and then what you can afford. And because you don't, as we age, you don't want your home to be the primary expense that you have. It's different when you're making money and you can afford mortgages and maybe push yourself to move into something a little bit bigger than you can afford because you're going to, move up the ladder, so to speak. But when you're older, you need disposable income in order to in order to get out and get to wherever you need to go.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So talk about a little bit, if you don't mind, about mindset and how important mindset is, because you can do all this entire three-legged stool and you could have that, what'd you call it? The organ?
The organ recital.
Yeah. The organ recital. You could do the organ recital for the entire book club. Truly. So how important is mindset, and how do we manage our mindset?
I don't know that it's debatable whether we're capable of managing our mindsets. I mean, some people are more naturally optimistic, glasses half full, and some people are more naturally pessimistic, glasses half empty.
Yeah.
So I think it's important, if it's possible for you, to look at aging as just another stage of life.
Yeah.
That there are so many good things about it. The patience that we've gained, the perspective that we've gained, the amount that what we've learned, that we can choose to pass on to others if we want, in so many ways. There's just a cornucopia of good reasons to be older, and things to be proud of as we get older, and still things to explore and do, and places to go if you're still mobile enough to do that. I was just today writing an article about older adults traveling. I write a regular blog post. Well, it's regular as of 1 or 2 a month for Forbes.com.
Sure.
And I write about anything that pertains to aging and retirement.
Yeah.
And today, there are more older adults, 60 plus, older adults traveling than any other age group.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. So we have all of that.
Yeah.
Going for us.
That's an article that we should put down in the show notes, because I think it's really important. Because it is different, and you have different questions, and traveling solo is a whole different ball game than being a part of a group. And it's not to say we can't do it. We just have to do it a little bit differently.
No, and I don't want anyone to take away the message, because I'm not giving the message that people should travel solo later in life. I actually think people should travel in groups, or at least pairs, later in life. because things do happen. And we may not be as capable in a number of ways of resolving whatever happens as we were when we were 35.
Yeah, yeah.
So, there's safety in numbers, even small numbers. Many of my contemporaries go on these organized tour vacations, and they just love them, absolutely love them.
Yeah.
Some places when you go, you kind of have to do that. If you want to go to Africa or India or somewhere, most people will choose to go on an organized tour, at least the first time. There's many ways of approaching it. But
yeah. So how did you get into this? I mean, because now you're writing articles. Is this part of what your career was before?
No. I left about a 20 or 25 year career in organizational behavior. I used to do workshops, leadership development and team development workshops in big corporations. That's why I was down in Silicon Valley. Much of my work was there. And then about, I guess when I was about 65, not that long ago, I got really interested in the retirement transition. What was challenging about that, and what kind of obstacles did people have to overcome, and et cetera, to have a successful retirement. Yeah. So I ended up taking a course in retirement coaching. And in those days, I'm saying 6, I think I was more like 61 or 2.
Okay.
And so I became a certified retirement coach and did that for a couple of years until I discovered that I was really fascinated by solo aging. And I kind of started talking about that and writing about that, and discovered that absolutely no one else was out there talking about it at the time. No one. Now there are several people that are talking about it, but because I was such a loner out there, I realized somebody needed to talk about it. So that's when I really completely left behind the organizational work and got the book written, and which came out in 2018. And from then on, it was just all solo aging all the time.
Yeah, interesting. So how has having a career, I mean, it's like a encore career, so to speak. How has that impacted your life post the corporate work you did?
Well, it's been wonderful for me because it has really opened up a whole new horizon that may go for another 5 years, may go for another 10 years. Who knows? I have a very dear friend who's been really a pioneer in the positive aging movement, and she's been writing a column for one of the smaller Los Angeles papers for over a decade now, and she is 10 years older than me. So I'm 73, she's 83, and she's still going strong. She and I went to the ASA meeting I was referring to. We went there together, and she'll, she's just like the Energizer Bunny, and I'm trying to emulate that.
Yeah.
And, some of it is luck, luck with health, for one thing, luck with mobility. And gosh, I don't know how many people I know have been just fine one day and taken a fall the next day. And, the next thing you know, they're on the mend from whatever.
Right.
So a little bit of some of it is being a little careful, knowing that a fall was one thing when you were 25. It's quite another thing when you're 75. So
sure. Yeah. But having that career, because that's something that we talk about in Extraordinary Women in the magazine, as well as on some of the podcasts, is creating what I call a side gig after you've had the big career, after you've raised the children, if that was your career. And it's interesting to me how many women really do want to create something, not something as intense as what it was that they did before, but something that makes them feel they're contributing. So would you agree that has changed your retirement as a result?
Oh, totally. I could never imagine actually totally retiring. It's completely unappealing to me. Now, some of my friends have completely retired, and now they're taking painting classes and Tai Chi, and they keep a very full life.
Right.
And that's their path. And it might not be your path. It wasn't my path. I don't think I have an artistic bone in my body.
No,
So, I have other talents that can be used in this way. So,
exactly.
It's really taking a look at yourself and not trying to model yourself on anybody else particularly, but looking at what you're good at and what interests you.
Mm-hmm.
And I often admonish some of my colleagues in this aging world, the professional aging world, to not disrespect those people who do choose a traditional retirement.
Sure.
They may have worked so hard for 30 years that they want to just play golf now or live on a cruise ship. You know what? It's their choice.
Yes. Yes. I so appreciate that it's not one size fits all. This is not, even though there's 3 legs to the stool can be different heights and different ingredients to each one of the legs to a great extent, and also who you are. You're entirely different than your husband. You're entirely different than your best friend. And therefore, what is it that interests you? So
absolutely.
This was a wonderful conversation, Sara. I so appreciate you sharing with us, because this is something we don't talk about very much. We really don't talk about aging. We don't use the word solo aging as a whole, even though most of us are doing it. And it's kind of part of that organ recital that we know it's in front of us, but we don't want to talk about it. So thank you. Thank you for joining.
You're very welcome.
And we'll put
it's been a pleasure, Sharri.
Well, thank you. And we'll put all of your information and even maybe some of the particular references you made in the podcast today down in the show notes so that people can explore and check it out. So thank you.